was growing up, my dad had a phrase, it builds character. And I used to hate that phrase. Because whether it was a hiking backpack that I thought was too heavy, or a broken heart, or too much homework, it was just the thing he always pulled out. And now as an adult, I love it as a framework because it does. That outlook on challenges and how you approach challenges is so healthy to have because challenges lead to the growth of the self. They do. Whether you're talking about the way the brain grows or the way a muscle is built or the way virtue grows and is cultivated within the soul. The most intense growth occurs under pressure when something is being used, when we're made to think or act in a new way that is challenging for us. And it's one of the clearest ways that we can grow in our trust for the Lord by growing through those challenges rather than just saying, no, I don't trust in you, Lord. I can't do that. We can recognize that God wants us to succeed in holiness, and He wants us to grow in trust, regardless of how difficult that challenge might be. We discussed earlier that we are created for a purpose, and He's given us all the work that we need to do. He's given us the gifts to do that work because He knows what that work is going to be, right? So He's already equipped you with what you need. And our challenge then is to learn how to fully trust in the Lord in those individual moments. Some challenges are temporary, some are recurring, some are chronic, some are really, really long-lasting. Others are things that we can fix easily with some effort. We don't even think about asking God to help us with. Some require help outside. Some require that we internally change and grow. Sarah asked me specifically to talk about one of the challenges that a lot of people have. You know, she mentioned people had approached her about it, and then just this week my sister-in-law asked me about it, and it's this term gaslighting that has been used a lot, specifically this last year. And gaslighting is an all-encompassing term for someone who tries to manipulate you or control you and your understanding of reality. It's kind of a natural extension that we made culturally in the last few decades when we said that it was okay for people to create their own reality. It's okay for you to be morally relative, to say that, well, you know, it's okay for me, it might not be okay for you, right? So the natural extension then is to say that your idea of what just happened is actually completely wrong because that doesn't mesh with my reality, right? So you guys probably played the telephone game when you were little. Okay, so we all grew up recognizing that people can hear and experience the same thing in a different way. Oh, that used to be called miscommunication, right? But gaslighting is a little bit more because gaslighting occurs when someone really tries to push their own thoughts and ideas and interpretations on you. They say things like, you must be going crazy, that's not really what happened, you don't know what you're talking about, you're imagining things, no need to be sensitive, I was just joking. Like, no, actually, you were kind of being to some extent, we all can have a tendency to gaslight because we understand that situations are going to be a little bit different based off of our own experiences. But in psychology terms, gaslighting occurs and is dramatic and damaging when the person's intent is to try to control or manipulate you. Okay, so that's the difference there between it being just normal people misunderstanding each other and someone being abusive. According to Dr. Stephanie Starks, people who gaslight use these 11 techniques. I'm just going to list them off for you. They tell blatant lies. Oh. Maybe. I've got that slide here for you. That was the break. You already had it. There we go. Signs of gaslighting. blatant lies, they deny something was ever said even though you have proof. They use what's near and dear to you as ammunition. They wear you down over time. Their actions don't match their words. They throw in positive reinforcements to confuse you. They know that confusion weakens people. They project. They try to align people against you. They tell you or others that you're crazy, and they tell you that everyone else is lying. So these are things that are done by narcissistic people with the intent to control and manipulate you. And there's a rise in this, again, because we've told people that whatever they experience is true. Their interpretation is true, whatever they think. Now, in all gaslighting situations, though, the person is just doing good old-fashioned bullying. They're trying to manipulate and control you. There are times when people don't necessarily realize that they're doing this. This is a pattern of behavior that maybe they grew up with or experiencing. And sometimes when people are struggling for control in their own lives, they're going to lash out, project, and insert drama into their interactions, because then they can kind of feel like they're more in control. So generally, when you're in a situation where you're seeing these things, when you're experiencing these things, there are a few things that you can do to help come out a little healthier than otherwise. First, recognize that you've got to choose your battles. So don't let another person draw you off topic from where you're at. Gaslighting is a great way for someone to get distracted from your main point. If you're talking about your day and your spouse focuses on one little inconsistency in what you're saying, simply say, that's not the point. I don't want to get drawn off topic and argue about whether it was 3 o'clock that I left or 3:15. That doesn't matter. My point was, and then move on. Don't let it get you upset, though. Secondly, you can point out their inconsistencies or the difference in interpretation, but then just move on. You don't have to convince the other person. You don't remember things exactly the way I do. I recognize that. That's fine. We're coming at it from different perspectives. I'm not going to change your memory of the experience. My point was only that, X, Y, or Z. Point out the cause and the effect of their behavior. Okay? When you argue with me about things like this, it makes me not want to talk with you at all about anything. Very, very straightforward. I want to be able to share with you without you criticizing me. Okay? Very clear cause and effect. When you speak to me like that, I shut down and I don't want to share with you. Okay? Don't try to convince them that you're right. Just hold your ground. Don't let them disturb you, and then move on. Or speak up and call it what it is. Actually, what you're saying is not true at all. Give them the reality in black and white, and don't let their lies or misdirection enter into your thoughts or steal your peace. Okay? But you have to make a choice which one of those directions you're going to go, and it may change by person, it may change by situation. Because how you deal with gaslighting, I gave you a couple different ways of dealing with it. How you deal with gaslighting is different based off of who the person is. Okay? Some of these things might work in some situations and not at all in others. But one of the things to remember is that this person is trying to control you, and getting upset is precisely the reaction that they're looking for. So don't let them get you upset. Stand your ground, be firm, be kind, and move on. In general, including but not limited to gaslighting situations, our interactions with others are one of our major crosses in this world. Okay? We're created to love and to be loved and to be in relationship with one another, right? We talked about in the beginning, and it's our interactions with one another that we grow in virtue, la-di-da. And that's when it's the hardest. Mark 8:34 says, whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and that of the gospel will save it. Our crosses are something that we typically don't want to take up and bring with us places. We want to ditch that cross in the first dark corner we can find, right? We want to hide it in the mess of our lives. We want to shove it in the closet. We want to stuff it into the empty wine bottle at the bottom of the trash bin. We don't like our crosses. And the last thing we want to do is hoist them up onto our shoulders and carry them with us each day. But if we want to follow the Lord, we have to take these crosses. We have to take these interactions with difficult people, right, with us every day. And so in doing so, we've got to be willing to surrender sometimes our temporal wishes, sometimes surrender that pride, and pursue a life with Jesus through others as his daughter, accepting those crosses as they come. And crosses can be big or small. Sometimes we like to think of the big crosses in life, you know, struggling with marriages or with insecurity economically or health struggles or friendship issues. But really, the daily crosses are sometimes easier to identify, the big things, and then the daily crosses are sometimes what wears us down, actually. We can kind of get the support we need for those big crosses, but it's the day-to-day that can make us snap. Sometimes our emotional response becomes the actual cross itself. So we respond emotionally to the situation instead of with peace, entering into those difficult struggles. So the reality of a sick loved one, for instance, produces fear and anxiety and despair and lack of trust, right? That's your emotional response, which is going to cause more problems than the actual sick loved one. When we're suffering, it's easy to dwell in the misery. I heard a quote somewhere, and I have not been able to find a citation, so I apologize if the author of this quote is listening to this talk. But it's that we've got to learn to stop ruminating on the specifics of our own cross. We just love to sit and dwell in whatever that cross is, and it just feeds us, but not in a good way at all. We ask ourselves that, like, why is this happening? Why would God leave me with this? Why do I have to deal with this? The why? And yet the search for that answer is never going to be satisfactory. It never is going to be. There's not an answer to that question that will help take any of it away. And the frustration is intensified when we are experiencing a cross that we feel is wrapped in some form of injustice. C.S. Lewis has a great quote. Men are not angered by mere misfortune, but by misfortune conceived as injury. And the sense of injury depends on the feeling that a legitimate claim has been denied. Injustice makes it harder to accept suffering, and entitlement leads us to interpret suffering as unjust. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. Injustice, that we say, makes it harder to accept a suffering, and entitlement leads us to interpret suffering as unjust. But our Lord chose to suffer and die for us. And if we hope to live in his image, we too are going to be asked to suffer. Why wouldn't we? Christ did not escape his cross, so what makes us think that we should try to escape our own crosses? The crosses we bear are part of our process. They're part of our journey. They're part of our path. And in order to embrace your cross, you've got to look at it as the role of his daughter, God's daughter, and not just muddle through, but step up and, when faced with challenges, keep two things in mind. First, you got to remember the times in the past when God was abundant in his mercy and grace to you. Okay, because it's easy to think that we're just like stuck here. Okay. Secondly, recognize that we are all going to face difficulty. And it's in that difficulty that we're given the opportunity to show our true nature and to say yes to the Lord and yes to his love and his grace. It's easy to love the Lord when everything's going great. It's a lot harder when things are difficult. When all the pleasantries are stripped aside, when trials face us, that's when we get to show God that we want to be his daughters. Our nature is tested when we're tempted, not when we're comfortable. But responding with anger to the Lord, although it's understandable, because he has the power to relieve us of the suffering, doesn't help us to recognize that God is not the one actually inflicting the power or inflicting the suffering on us. He allows the suffering. But in our fallen world, suffering should just be expected, guys. And God's not the one who should receive our anger. I mean, you can throw it at him. He'll take it. But we need to stay constant in our love for him, even when it's hard. Developmental psychologists describe cognitive growth as a process by which the brain is like stretched and stressed, and growth occurs as an outcome from those experiences. So brains which are not challenged, brains that have lived in a deprived environment, don't face the same level of growth. We know that with kids, right? Athletes know this to be true of the body. My kids are all athletes, and in order to get the muscle to grow, they go into training, and they expect that training is going to be miserable for a short period of time, but it is going to make them stronger and faster and better ball skills, all of that. They must undergo that pressure in order to grow stronger, because it's that growth in the uncomfortable and painful times that gives them the best benefits. And this too is for the spiritual life. We've got to look at painful challenges as an opportunity to grow spiritually. One of my favorite quotes ever, James 1:2-5, "Consider it all joy, brothers, when you," yeah, I got it. "Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials, for you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance be perfect, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. But if any of you lacks wisdom, he should go to God, who gives all generously and ungrudgingly, and he will be given it." So even if you think that suffering may serve as a purpose, it's hard to understand why we should face it with joy. That was a little bit of a stretch there. But it's when we encounter suffering, that we have the opportunity to exercise our faith. And it's in the midst of those struggles that we're really able to show ourselves which areas are strong and which areas we need to keep working at growing. So in order to use suffering as a way to grow in holiness, we've got to change our emotional mind state. If you can't change the actual situation, you've got to change your response to that situation. Father Thomas Dubé writes in his book, Born of Fire, "There's a close correlation between suffering well and growth in prayer depth. Of itself, of course, suffering improves no one, for a person can become bitter in his woes. But trials, born with love and in union with the crucified beloved, make one grow by leaps and bounds." And that's true, too, of the spiritual life. It's true in the way our bodies and our brains grow. Are any of you familiar with Dr. Caroline Leaf? She's got a new book out called Switch on Your Brain, and in it she does a beautiful job of explaining the relationship between your thoughts, your brain, and how it manifests in the body. And so the work in neuroscience now is so cool, because we know that experiencing a thought or a situation causes our brain to respond a certain way. We might be given a flood of cortisol, the stress hormone that helps move us into action. We might be flooded with adrenaline. We might have serotonin or dopamine. All of those are released in the brain based off of our thoughts about what we're interacting or what we're experiencing in our interactions. And so if you can control the way you are interpreting an event, some bit of suffering, and say, I'm going to consider this joy, Lord. I'm going to enter into this and I'm going to grow, as opposed to, oh my God, the sky is falling, right? You can actually change the way your body physically responds to that by changing the way that first or second thought is interpreted. I'm going to be talking, how many of you have kids who are coming to the thing later today? Does anyone? Oh, good. Okay, so I'm going to talk to them a lot about this. Ask them about the massage slides, because that is going to get them to open up about the whole thing. If you realized how powerful your thoughts are, you would never think a negative thought. Okay? And if you can unite your suffering to prayer and to an awareness of God working in your life, this is how it's going to work out. Before we go to break, let me just close. There's this psychological concept called hedonistic adaptation, and this might help you with that thought process. And what they found is that we all have like a happiness medium. Okay? So if you experience, let's say you've got a 9 out of 10 day, and the next day is a 9 out of 10 day, and oh my gosh, your life is going great. After a series of 9 out of 10 days, those 9s are kind of more like 6s. Okay? You kind of go down to a middle, because you just expect that every day is going to be a 9. Similarly, if you got a bunch of 3s, then suddenly you start describing those 3s as, it's just like every other day, it's like a 5. Okay? Because you just get used to it. If you can approach suffering as a happiness reset, it'll help you to get back to that 9. So you got a couple of 9s, you're like, yeah, life is good. And then you have a really crummy day. You got a 3. That resets that happiness, and you go back to your 9. You're like, yeah, okay, I'm back at a 9. Yesterday was crummy, but boy, that's all right. So suffering, bad days, trials, can actually help you in the long run, because they can reset that happiness point for you. So that you're no longer striving for more and more and more and better. You can recognize that 9 out of 10 day, or even that 10 out of 10 day, as pretty awesome. So keep that in mind too as we go. Suffering is purposeful. And if you approach suffering with, I'm going to avoid suffering at all costs, sometimes that cost becomes your own spiritual self. God is allowing what's happening in your life for a reason. So embrace it and grow through it. So ready for tacos?